Good afternoon. My name is Nilakshi Bhattacharya and I welcome you all to this webinar, Cancer in Women. The webinar is jointly being organized by Apollo Proton Cancer Center and the Times of India. Though the number of cancer cases has been rising alarmingly around the world, the number of people recovering from it has also increased, all thanks to advanced treatment procedures. In this third and final session of the webinar, we will discuss about a de-escalating treatment in breast cancer. But before we begin our discussion, I'd like to introduce you to our panelist, Dr. Bhavna Sirohi.
Hello.
Dr. Bhavna is a world-renowned oncologist, widely considered a leading authority in breast cancer and gastrointestinal cancer. She has worked with some of the best oncology centers around the world. At present, she is the lead medical oncologist at Apollo Proton Cancer Center. Thank you so much, Dr. Bhavna, for being here.
Thank you, Nilakshi. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we get into anything else, I'd like to ask you the most basic question as a human, as a layman. What does de-escalating treatment in breast cancer mean?
So, when I started training more than 2 decades ago, most of the patients who came to my clinic post breast cancer surgery or other GI cancers, we would just give chemotherapy. And we would try and give chemotherapy, hormone therapy, because we did not know how to select them well about 2 decades ago. By de-escalation, I mean that the treatments are getting smarter and kinder. We have a lot of modalities available to us to guide us in our treatment decision making. Which patient needs chemotherapy, radiotherapy, targeted therapy? So let us say surgery. Earlier on we used to remove the breast, mastectomy, which is called. We used to do and remove all the lymph nodes from under the arm, which increases your risk of developing lymphedema, that is swelling of the arm, by up to 20 to 40% in some studies. So what we do now is we consider every woman for breast conserving surgery. So that is de-escalation of surgery. And also in the underarm, we don't remove all the lymph nodes. We remove only there are certain techniques, which sentinel lymph node biopsies, which would remove only certain lymph nodes. So we are de-escalating the treatment of the axilla as well. So that is for surgery. For radiotherapy, what we used to give is 5 to 6 weeks of radiotherapy. So what we are doing now is most ladies get about 3 weeks of radiotherapy, but now there are some studies where we are recommending 1 week of radiotherapy in some patients. And then, you have things like proton therapy, which makes it more accurate as well. And in chemotherapy, what we are doing is we used to give 6 months of chemotherapy, but we select patients to see that some patients may need only 3 months of chemotherapy. We do certain genomic tests, we look deeper into the tissue. And that those genomic assays tell us that this patient will not benefit from chemotherapy. So we are able to avoid chemotherapy in those patients. We used to give 1 year of targeted treatment. Now we are giving 6 months of targeted treatment, or at least considering it in some patients. So that is what I mean by de-escalation of care. There is a drug we used to use in chemotherapy, it's called 5-FU. And it was standard of care till up to 2 years ago. And now we no longer use it because we realized that it doesn't actually add to the efficacy, but causes more toxicity. So none of the regimens now have 5-FU as a chemotherapy drug in breast cancer that we are using. So I think over the years, we are very grateful to our patients, from whom we've learned that we don't need to actually give everything to every patient.
Okay. So now let's get the most. When cancer is detected, it can be very stressful for both for the patient and the family. But the first thing is to know the best doctor for the patient. So what would you suggest a patient should, when one should look for in an oncologist?
So I think it's very important when you're diagnosed with any type of cancer, whether it's breast cancer, that you try and find an oncologist who is specializes in that type of cancer. So, so in the West, in UK, I was not allowed to treat more than 2 types of cancers. And what that does is, you are very focused in your research, and you kind of become an expert in that. It's very difficult to keep up with the research in all types of cancer. So I think site-specific oncology is the way forward. So find an oncologist, I would say, who deals in your type of cancer. Second thing I would suggest is find a center which has different modalities of treatment, and also which has something called an MDT, a tumor board or a joint clinic. It's given different names in different centers. It's called a multidisciplinary tumor board, where all of us sit together: surgeon, medical, radiation, pathologist, radiologist. We all sit together, we assess the patient's case, we individualize the treatment plan, whether patient needs chemo first, hormone therapy first, or whether they need surgery first. So all of that complex decision making only can happen in an MDT because it's unbiased completely. So the whole aim is that the approach is patient centric. The patient should get the best treatment irrespective of what treatment they need. And it's very important in revenue driven models as well. The other thing which is very important is your relationship with the doctor. I feel there is a chemistry between the doctor and the patient. It's very personal, and it depends completely on communication and trust. So I think these things are very important. And I would say, if you're not happy, do not hesitate to take a second opinion, especially if you're having trouble understanding why this treatment is recommended. And so just ask for a second opinion. A lot of times I myself ask for a second opinion from my colleagues around the world, or in India as well, if there is a very rare patient or a rare case that I'm seeing.
Okay, okay. And if someone finds a lump in her breast, so should she always go for a test? And do you recommend biopsy?
So no, I would not recommend biopsy in every breast lump. I would suggest that you see your physician or your gynecologist, or your preventive health program physician. Have it checked out, because majority of the lumps in the breast are fibroadenomas. They're benign, or fibroadenosis. And sometimes it's very clear. We have specific gradings in radiology. It's breast, we grade them from 0 to 5. So if it is between 3 and 5, we may recommend additional tests. But if it is, BI-RADS grade 1 or 2, we would just recommend a follow-up ultrasound maybe in 6 months, or just reassure the patient and say you do not need to come for further tests.
Okay. And early detection is one of the most easiest way to recovery. So what would you like to say about that?
So I think most of the patients, I see in my clinic present in late stages. I would say 50 to 60% of the patients would come in stage 3 or 4. So by stage, I mean stage 1 is when it is confined to the breast and it is measures less than 2 centimeter. Stage 2 is, when still confined to the breast. Stage 3 is it has gone to the lymph nodes in the underarm or the axilla. Stage 4 is when it has spread to distant organs. So majority of my patients will come in stage 3 to 4. What that means is that the chances of being cured are less, and the cost of treatment is very high. In stage 4 breast cancer, sometimes ladies are on treatment forever, and the cost of treatment is also very high. So I think as a society and as women, we must try and go for early diagnosis. And there are so many strategies which are there to diagnose cancers early. UK has invested millions and millions of pounds in setting up comprehensive diagnostic centers, where a lady walks in through the door in the afternoon, or a patient is given the all clear on cancer. And I think this is what we are trying at Apollo as well, that when you come in, you have all the comprehensive tests for cancer screening that lend themselves to screening, like breast cancer, cervical cancer, colon cancer, and head and neck cancer. When I say you lend it to screening, I mean that you can diagnose it at stage 0. You can diagnose it at a precancerous stage. So early detection will save lives and increase cure rates.
Okay. And does all breast cancer require surgery?
So again, it depends on what stage a patient has presented in. If it is early stage breast cancer, yes, surgery is the only modality which would help us cure the patient. And but if it is late stages, let us say stage 4 breast cancer, then very rarely we would recommend surgery. We would go for usually medical treatments. Local treatment is only given for symptom control, like surgery or radiotherapy is given only for symptom control. But in early stage breast cancer, I think currently the recommendations are that surgery is a must, though a lot of research is going around in the world to see whether we can avoid surgery in some select patients who have a fantastic response to chemotherapy or targeted therapy.
Okay. And what does it lumpectomy and has mastectomy mean? I mean, I think I have pronounced this wrongly. I mean.
So I think in this day and age, ladies should not undergo a mastectomy if it is not indicated. So the indications of removal of the breast or mastectomy are very few, and they are when most of the breast, all the quadrants of the breast are involved with the cancer. Then one would not have a choice but go for a removal of the breast. Or a patient has an inflammatory breast cancer, we would recommend a mastectomy. But even if the lady presents with a large sized breast lump, we can actually downstage. We can give treatments before surgery to downstage the cancer so that breast conserving surgery or lumpectomy is possible. By that I mean you do not remove the breast, you just remove the area of the breast which had cancer. In fact, what we do nowadays is when we give chemotherapy before surgery, we clip the area where the cancer is present, because in triple negative breast cancer or HER2 positive breast cancer, which are two types of breast cancer, about 50 to 60% patients attain a complete response. So the tumor completely disappears. So the clip actually helps the surgeon identify where the cancer was, and they can remove that part of the breast. And what they can do is, I saw a patient the other day, I could not even figure out which breast had been operated on. So the cosmesis was so good. So, even if you have breast conserving surgery, you can have things like oncoplastic techniques, which, a surgeon can probably talk to you more in detail, where, the cosmesis is so good. And I think for all women who undergo breast cancer surgery, the cosmesis has to be good, whether it's after breast conserving surgery or after removal of the breast.
So those are post care kind of surgery?
Pardon?
Post care kind of surgery, these are?
So post care after, you are asking for care after surgery?
No, no, no. Just now what you have said that I didn't get the term.
So it's oncoplasty, which can be done. It's a specialized technique where one can make sure that the breast looks similar to the other breast. So the cosmesis is good after surgery. And after removal of breast as well, I think it's very important that reconstruction should be discussed with the patient, because which always remains an option, either immediately or sometimes delayed, which we do 2 years later.
Okay. And I have heard of a local treatment. What does it mean and how does it work? Local treatment?
Surgery is a local treatment. So surgery and radiotherapy are what are local treatments. That means they work only on where the breast cancer is present. Surgery we've already talked about, and the other local treatment we have is radiotherapy.
Okay, so can you tell something about radiotherapy?
So radiotherapy are, I'm not a specialist in that, but they are just X-rays which are given to the breast, and like I said, we used to give it for a longer period earlier, but we have again learned from a lot of clinical trials, which thousands of patients have kindly participated, and we have de-escalated the care in giving radiation for shorter periods of time.
Okay. Okay. And proton therapy is part of the local treatment?
So proton therapy is a type of radiotherapy. It is more precise and more accurate. It protects the organs surrounding like heart and lungs. So the dose of radiation that is given to these organs is less after proton therapy.
Okay. And what about immunotherapy?
So immunotherapy are again a class of drugs which work with your immune system to help fight the cancer. For breast cancer, I must say the data does not look very encouraging. Immunotherapy is very expensive. Also, you know, each course of treatment can be as expensive as 4 to 5 lakhs, and in advanced cancers where it is recommended, once you start, you have to continue forever. So, and the benefit is there is a bit of controversy about the use of immunotherapy in breast cancer. It is not strongly recommended because there was a recent trial which was published, which actually showed that that the effect may not be as robust as we had imagined it to be.
So, I mean, how people are aware about the facilities available in India?
So I think I've spent a long time in UK, almost 2 decades, and I worked in Tata Hospital and various other centers in India, and I'm currently working at the Proton Center in Chennai. So the facilities, I would say, are at par or even better in India than any other center in the world. So, I mean, if a patient develops, say, breast cancer in India, I don't think they need to travel to New York or London for treatment, because all the facilities are available in India. In fact, some of the centers have better facilities, I would say, as far as say the newer techniques are concerned, like radiation therapy. The chemotherapy drugs are the same. In fact, universal health coverage countries like UK are also resource limited, and they are using biosimilars, which are actually manufactured in India, and using generics, which are again we lead the world in making these drugs and you know, send it to people all across the world. So I would say that the care in India is at par and as per the national or international standards. So if you had a cancer, there is no need for a patient to travel abroad.
And what about the awareness of people?
So again, you know, awareness is something. The reason where we lose the battle is that we do not have a coordinated screening program. We do not have universal health coverage within our country. I think the government is doing fantastic efforts in that they have started a screening program in 2016 for 3 common cancers: cervix, breast, and head and neck cancers, where people, women from the age of 30 years, you know, every 5 years, they can have a clinical breast exam by a specialist. And if, you know, a lump is seen, they can go to their community health center or a district hospital where an ultrasound can be done and a biopsy can be arranged if needed. So this is something that has been rolled out. I am not aware of any data about implementation nationwide, but I think this is a fantastic step that has happened in India. So, but we need to do more in increasing awareness, and thank you, Nilakshi, for doing this, because I hope this is increasing awareness in people about, you know, being aware about their own health and talk about cancer. I think we should destigmatize cancer. That is very, very important. I think in all the movies that are done, you know, if somebody has to die, they make them have cancer, which is very wrong.
True. And what about, yeah, go ahead.
No, I think so. It actually creates a very negative perception about cancer. So I would say majority of cancers are curable if detected early. I think so. Don't be disheartened. And the other thing I really want to make a point is, you know, when you're diagnosed with cancer, it's like, you know, the C word. Everybody's scared, and then a lot of opinions, and some of the opinions may be with alternative treatments, and patients sometimes come to me at a stage when they are incurable or untreatable because they've been on another form of treatment for some time, which is not evidence based. So if you're diagnosed with cancer, please follow the specialist's advice in any of the center. We have amazing government centers across the country, regional cancer centers, and the corporate, in the corporate India, there are so many cancer centers. So I think important is, early cancer, the cost of treatment is less.
That's true. That's true. And is there any, would you like to share any case study that you are very proud of, a person recovered with
So
a diverse?
I have a lot of case studies. I had come back from London just last year, but I had treated this lady about 10 years ago in Delhi, actually. And she had come with her mother, and she saw me in the hospital, and it was such, and it was such a pleasure to see her 10 years later. She had an aggressive breast cancer. She was on treatment for a year with me. But it was such a pleasure to see her that she'd forgotten about her checkups, her own mammograms. I said, when did you last have the mammogram? And she was like, I had it, she said, after you left I haven't had it. So it's very important that that even if you complete your treatment for whichever cancer, and early breast cancer, we recommend annual mammograms once a year. So she had the mammogram and I saw her, but it's an amazing feeling. I treated a girl in Tata Hospital in '94, and I attended her wedding. I sometimes, patients become family and friends, over time, especially when they're cured. The line gets blurred sometimes. And again, I feel as an oncologist very privileged to be invited to weddings or naming ceremonies. So I attended her wedding in Delhi, and now she's in New York. And so again, all these things, one has become a marine biologist. So all of these, inspire you to do even better.
Can young women also have breast cancer? I mean, younger lot?
Yes, absolutely. So, most of my patients, I don't know whether they find me. Most of my patients are young women with breast cancer, and that is, I would say, less than 40 years of age. And I think that may be related to the younger population matrix in India. And also, I think urbanization and lifestyle changes. What is happening is we are working more, we are delaying our having kids, it's later marriages as well, not breastfeeding, or breastfeeding for a short while in a rush to come back to work. Because, as women, we always have to, there's always a bit of struggle involved in the office dynamics and everything. So you're always trying to do more and prove more as well. So I think physical inactivity, junk food, all of these may be the reason why the incidence of breast cancer in younger women in India is rising, and also probably awareness and screening in urban India may be one of the causes as well.
So are you happy with the number of people coming for screening? Are you happy with the number?
No, I think, and especially in COVID times, actually, it's been it's very sad that most of the patients have said, they've had this lump since March, February, they were planning to go. And as women, I have noticed, not just in India, it's the same story in the West as well. We do not prioritize our own health. We always, prioritize our children's health, our husband's health, our parents' health. So, the daughters will always be present to look after their parents, their mothers. So, but we forget our own health. So this lady had a lump for some time since February. It was a small lump, but when I saw her recently, it had spread to the lymph nodes in the neck and underarm. So automatically, and on the other side, it had become stage 4. Probably it was stage 2 to start with, I don't know. And there's another patient who came, had abdominal pain for quite some time, started in March, lockdown, too scared to come to the hospital because of COVID. So one of the other messages I want to get out that, the culture of fear has been counterproductive. I think there'll be a cancer pandemic that's going to happen because the number of cases haven't gone down. So the patients are all sitting at home. So this patient came with gallbladder cancer, but the liver functions were so deranged or abnormal that, I had to say that I'm really sorry, I can't we can't treat you, but it's only best supportive care, palliative care now. So, and maybe he was treatable at that time. It's very difficult to say. But I think it's one of the key messages I want to give is do not sit at home if you have a problem. Please, hospitals are safe places. We have really made them safe. What we have learned is segregation. We are segregation COVID areas from non-COVID areas. So if you have an issue, please come to the hospital, you know, masking, wearing a mask, social distancing, hand washing, I think are the key determinants in protecting yourself.
So, and does it spread very fast, breast cancer?
So no, I think it depends on what type of cancer it is. And again, when we do a biopsy and we look under the microscope, we can, you know, we say this is the grade of the breast cancer. Grade 1 is when it looks like normal breast tissue. Grade 3 is when, you know, there are a lot of angry cancer cells which are dividing. Grade 2 is between. So if a patient has, like I saw this lady, she'd had this lump in her breast for the last, she said she had one of her grandsons hit her. She thought it's related to that. She developed a lump and she'd had this lump for last 10 years. So this was a grade 1 cancer, which the patient had for quite a long time. And it's a slow growing cancer. So, but some cancers like, you know, triple negative breast cancer or HER2 positive breast cancer can be fast growing. So I think each cancer has its different biology. So you may have 3-4 patients with the same type of breast cancer, but you know, we still have to individualize treatment plans for each of them.
Okay, and you just spoke about palliative care. So can you tell us something about that?
So I think palliative care is sadly something which we don't talk about much in India, but it is very important. So, you know, for cancer, it's right from screening to prevention to early diagnosis to treatment, and then palliative care and end of life care. So I'm very lucky and privileged to be working with Can Support, which is a palliative care organization based in Delhi, which provides free palliative care to people at home. So I think palliative care is very important part of cancer care. It does not mean end of life care. What it means is, you know, symptom control. So we have a fantastic palliative care specialist here at Apollo Proton, and he helps me look after my patients better, helps me look after their pain control, helps me optimize their doses of morphine if needed. So I think a lot of studies done in the West which showed that, you know, patient-reported outcome measures, if a patient's symptoms are acted upon right at the beginning and if they have early access to palliative care, the quality of life and the quality of their cancer journey is much better.
And if since you work abroad, so if you compare palliative care in India and abroad, how do you compare?
So, I mean, everybody has access to palliative care in the West, and in UK, like I said, you know, I would involve a palliative care specialist right at the time of diagnosis if a patient was diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer, not for end of life, but to, you know, as an MDT work together. But in India, I think as a culturally, we are very conscious. The minute we use the word palliative care, I think so it is a conversation and a journey that the consultant or the doctor or the oncologist has to have with the patient and introduce it during their cancer journey. But no, the palliative care services are abysmal in India, and I think we need to do more about it, to have more organizations like Can Support in every country. I always say that, you know, we should have, in UK we used to have Macmillan nurses who would help us deliver a lot of cancer care. So I always talk about maybe we should have Can Support nurses, you know, which may help us deliver palliative care in various hospitals across India.
Now getting back to treatment, what is targeted therapy?
So targeted therapy is, you know, is a form of cancer treatment that the drugs are designed to target the cancer cells without affecting the normal cells. So like in breast cancer, we use a drug quite commonly called trastuzumab. So it will target so the side effects are minimal with that drug, and we give it, you know, patients come in. So in UK, like I would give it like an insulin injection subcutaneously. It's not available subcutaneously in India. So we just give it as a half-an-hour infusion. Patients come, have it, and go to work. So, so that's what it means. It does not affect the normal cells as much. Chemotherapy is something which would affect the normal cells and act on the cancer cells as well.
Can you elaborate on chemotherapy? I mean, how does it work and how does it affect?
So chemotherapy is again, a list of drugs that affect the cancer cells, and it acts mainly on the dividing cancer cells, and then they die if chemotherapy is acting on them. But it also acts on normal cells. That's why you have side effects. So the side effects are related to the cells in your body that are dividing the fastest. So the cells in our body that are dividing are, hair follicles, taste buds, skin, bone marrow. So the side effects with chemotherapy are also related to that. So chemotherapy can affect hair follicles. You'll have hair loss. You don't taste the food because it affects the taste buds. But the normal cells have an amazing capacity to recover very quickly. So by the time the patient is due the next dose of chemotherapy, the normal cells have recovered. So if it's affected, the white cells may go down, but they would recover very fast by the time the patient is coming for the next dose of chemotherapy.
And what is the period of two chemotherapies, the in-between period?
So chemotherapy, the in-between period is called a cycle, and every patient, I think we have to individualize. It can be given weekly intervals, 2 weekly, 3 weekly, and some chemos are given at 4 weekly intervals. So for every patient, it is different, depends on the regimen that is being given. What I tell patients on chemotherapy is, that there are 4 things that they should look after. So one is hydration, drinking 2 to 3 liters of fluids every day. Second is nutrition. The food doesn't taste well. You don't have a sense of smell, or you've lost your taste buds. But food has to be eaten like medicine. So small, frequent meals throughout the day. So hydration, nutrition. Third is hygiene. So food hygiene, toilet hygiene, personal hygiene, oral hygiene, because very likely patients get infections from themselves. So looking after their own hygiene is very important, and the food they are taking. And the most important thing on chemo is, actually it should be 5 things. 4th is exercise. I think exercise is very, very important during chemotherapy. One should not be sedentary. And the 5th thing I've just thought about is, one should be positive. So I've had a lot of patients who've not given, I always give their examples, and I keep saying, can I ask this patient to call you? So that, you can talk to them and tell them how you went through. I had a 77-year-old lady just last year. I rang her the other day. I was trying to convince a patient to have chemotherapy because the benefit was quite significant in her. And so I said, do you mind speaking to this patient? And then this other patient of mine in Delhi spoke to her and convinced the patient to have chemotherapy. So this 77-year-old lady, did not modify any doses or anything, because even though she was 77, her mental attitude, the way she had chemotherapy, throughout chemo, she was in Delhi, Calcutta. I don't think she gave up a single day's work. She's an artist. And just sailed through the treatment with no side effects, literally. Had some minor side effects like mouth ulcers and everything, but she managed it very well. So I think mental attitude, positive attitude, stress-free attitude is also very important.
So positive attitude does help in treatment?
I think it does, but I have a lot of patients who say that you talk about this, and then sometimes it is very difficult to be positive when you're going through. So a lot of our patients not only have their own cancer diagnosis to deal with, but they may be going through their teenage son having a problem, or going through a divorce, or there are other things going on in their life as well. And the cancer itself and the treatment can be quite tough, even though, like I said, we've become better and better at minimizing the side effects. So yes, positive attitude does help, because you have the energy and the drive to be able to exercise, eat, drink. So again, I would say that take psychological support. which is, if needed, don't hesitate in asking for it as well if it has not been offered to you, because you have to be selfish. You have to get through the treatment and complete the treatment.
What about support groups?
So, I think this is the most important thing. Like I said, I have this patient talk to another patient. So when a patient sees another patient who's been through the same journey 10 years later, 5 years later, I think it gives a lot of encouragement. I put a chemo port to give chemotherapy a lot of times. So when I take the patient to the daycare and show them the chemo port, whatever I say doesn't mean much, but when I show it to them, it makes a lot of difference for them to know that, with this in, they can swim, they can lead a normal life. So I think patient support groups are very important. I do one every third Monday of the month. And actually, this is the one positive thing that has come out of COVID. That, we do these support group meetings, and I've had my patients from Bangalore, from Bombay, from London join the group. I did some work in Nairobi, in Kenya, I remember. So I had a patient from there join in as well. And Nigeria. So I think this is democratized the support group. So I started calling it the Global Support Group Meeting. And I have colleagues from all over the world. Like I had one of my dear friends, Rob, who's a world authority on bone health. So we take issues which are very important, they are patient driven. So one of the topics we did was vaginal dryness, on hormone therapy. What of all the treatments we give sometimes can be really affecting a patient's quality of life. So we did one on hot flushes. We did another one on lymphedema. So I try and get the world authority on that to come and talk, and I learn a lot as well. And patients learn as well. So I think patient support groups are very, very important for empowering the patients. And I think empowering patients will change the political will of the country. And hopefully we'll have better healthcare.
You just spoke about daycare.
Yeah.
So how does it work?
So daycare is a place where patients have chemotherapy. So I don't think I have ever admitted a patient, very rarely, patient says that, the insurance company is insisting on 24 hours admission, then, I would to save money for them, I would consider it. But most insurance companies allow that. So most chemotherapy that we do in this day and age, whether it's for breast cancer, GI cancer, some other cancers, may need admission, but for breast and GI cancers, very rarely do we admit patients. So we do most of the treatment in chemotherapy daycare, and the most important component of a daycare is the oncology nursing. I think nursing, I feel, is the engine that drives the hospital. And the second thing is the oncology pharmacy. So I started this concept of oncology pharmacy, I think, remember, way back in 2009. When we introduced it, I think it makes the chemotherapy delivery safer. So I write the prescription, it's checked by a pharmacist, it's checked by a nurse. So there are 2-3 levels of checks that are built in so that it makes the chemotherapy safe for the patient. So I think daycare is a place, and I've always tried to also make the daycare, which is a pleasant looking place, has natural light which comes in, so that, because patients sometimes end up spending a lot of time there, sometimes the whole day, and sometimes coming every week for chemotherapy. So it's important that the ambience in the daycare is good.
So tell me something about hormone therapy.
So ladies who have estrogen receptor positive breast cancer, it is a test that we do when we do a biopsy or when we do surgery, and we look under the microscope and say that you have an ER positive, estrogen receptor positive breast cancer. So if patients have that, then they receive hormone therapy, and there are either, so if a lady is premenopausal, then we would consider a drug called tamoxifen. And sometimes what we are trying to do in ER positive breast cancer is decrease the amount of estrogen in the body. So the drug tamoxifen blocks the estrogen to go through the cell. So it's but there are some other drugs which decrease the level of estrogen hormone in the body by suppressing the ovaries. So that would count as hormone therapy. There's another class of drug called aromatase inhibitors, drug like letrozole. I'm just giving one example. So these drugs are called hormone therapy and are usually given in early breast cancer for a period of, I would say, 5 to 10 years. We used to give it for 5 years, but then we realized that the risk of recurrence of cancer coming back in ER positive breast cancer is there for 10 years or maybe even longer. So now we have increased the duration of hormone therapy to 10 years in most of our patients. And, you know, hormone therapy, though, you know, we talk about it easily, it's a tablet that you take, you know, tamoxifen so they're very cost effective treatments as well. But they do have quite a few side effects and they affect daily quality of life. So I think it's very important as a patient and as an oncologist that we address those concerns at every clinic visit, because what we don't want is patients to stop those treatments.
You just mentioned quality of life. How a patient can improve their quality of life after getting cancer treatment? Because it can be very difficult.
So I think cancer survivorship is an upcoming branch, and I've always talked about it. I'm very passionate about survivorship, and this is how living after cancer or living with cancer. I think there are a lot of studies which have shown that patients who exercise, the risk of cancer coming back is about 25% less. So it's, you know, a very simple thing that one can incorporate in one's lifestyle. 30 minutes of exercise that makes your heart rate go up or makes you sweat will decrease your risk of recurrence and will also decrease the risk of developing another breast cancer. So I think and also looking after bone health is very, very important. Exercise also put the calcium, weight bearing exercises help the calcium back in the bone. So I think all of these looking after some of the drugs that we gave in the olden days can cause heart problems 10 to 15 years later. So monitoring, just doing a simple ultrasound of the heart about 10 to 15 years later should be part of the program. And very rarely some patients may develop second cancers because of the radiation or the chemo drugs that they had 10 to 15 years ago. So again, you know, be proactive about your health. Just, you know, cancer screening is important, but proactively look after your lipid profile, vitamin levels, bone health. All of these are very important as well.
Okay. Sometimes cancer is detected in pregnant women. I mean, that can be a very serious condition because another life is involved. So is the treatment different?
So again, this is something which I have seen quite a bit, both in UK and here. So what we have learned is chemotherapy is safe for the baby in the second and third trimester, but it is not safe in the first trimester. Hormone therapy, targeted therapy, radiation therapy is not recommended during pregnancy. So what we try and do is that with medical treatment, we try and get the lady to term so that after she delivers the baby, she can have the local treatments. And in fact, there was a study which looked at up to 18 years later of the babies who were born, whether they had any problems because of the chemotherapy that was given to their mother. And I think there was evidence that, you know, that their health, cognitive health, mental health was absolutely fine compared to the babies in the normal population. So I think one should not recommend termination of pregnancy just because the patient has developed early breast cancer.
Any case study that you'd like to share?
So yeah, I mean, this is, you know, having a child is the most joyful experience for a lady, you know, and a mother. And then to be diagnosed with breast cancer is very tough, and you're struggling with your pregnancy related issues, with your leg swelling. And I saw this lady I remember, and we treated in Tata Hospital, and we treated her with in conjunction with the Wadia Hospital, which was next door, and we gave her chemotherapy in the second and third trimester, and she delivered a full-term baby, and then had, after the delivery of the full-term baby, then she had surgery, and after that radiotherapy. So I mean, to see the baby and the mother after, you know, after this is fantastic. And I was part of some of the guidelines that we wrote for Royal College of Obs and Gynae in London with my mentor, Professor Ian Smith. And again, this was very strongly recommended that, you know, one should not, because this could be a precious child. The couple may have been trying for a child for 2 years, 3 years. So being diagnosed with breast cancer during pregnancy should not be an indication for termination.
But does that make the baby vulnerable to cancer when?
No, no. So that's what I said. This study looked at, and they followed up the children who were exposed to chemotherapy in utero for more than 18 years. And none were found to have cancer or other abnormalities, actually.
Okay, okay. And what about counseling? Because cancer patients who undergo treatment, such serious treatment, are depressed and psychologically traumatized. So any kind of counseling that you provide?
So psychological support is extremely important at the time of diagnosis and during the patient's treatment journey. So psychological support should be offered to all patients with. So I think there are a few essentials of cancer care and treatment, which I feel should be offered to every single patient who comes to a cancer center. One is psychological support. Next is dietitian support. And third is, you know, physiotherapy, exercise support. You know, what can be done, especially, you know, after breast surgery. The physiotherapy is very, very important. And the fourth is palliative care. I think it should be the right of every patient to have access to all four of these modalities of treatment at every cancer center.
And how does physiotherapy help in breast cancer?
So, you know, if let's say if a patient has had surgery and the lymph nodes under the arm are removed, they are supposed to exercise. And a lot of times, what we see is just post surgery, there would be some pain, and patients stop exercising. What happens is then they're cured of their cancer, but they develop a frozen shoulder, and they're never able to lift their arm up throughout their life, because, you know, there is cording, fibrosis. So when you get a cut on your skin, you know, there is a scar, and the whole tissue kind of becomes a scar. And, you know, so same thing can happen in the axilla. So you're never able to lift your arm then if you do not do exercises. In UK, actually, they are running now boot camps before you start your chemotherapy for 2 weeks, before you start your chemotherapy or surgery for cancer patients. In that boot camp, it's called prehab. Patients are actually taught, you know, how to exercise and you know, look after their health. So I think exercise has a very, very important role to play at every aspect of cancer treatment. One should not overdo it. I had a patient recently who was on chemotherapy, and she would just do I think 3 hours of treadmill every day. And her mother complained, you know, what have you told her? She wants to exercise the whole time. So one should not overdo it also.
And how can someone stay motivated?
I think the key thing is talk to your doctor, speak to friends, speak to like-minded friends. You know, don't speak to people who depress you. Stay away from them. So I had a lady who'd go for a walk every morning, you know, and she started losing her hair after chemotherapy. And a lot of ladies were like, you know, my so-and-so was treated and she died. And, you know, so sometimes a lot of people discourage you and give you all these negative thoughts. Why don't you go and meet this person? Why don't you do this? Have this vitamin pill. And they bring all these things for the patient. So very important, surround yourself with a close circle of friends, you know, who will help you, motivate you, inspire you, take psychological support if needed. And, you know, exercise. Listen to your body is what I tell patients. You know, when they're having treatment, you have good days and bad days. So learn to use the good days to do all the things that you want to do. Some days maybe, bad days, you're feeling very tired. So, take rest, read a book, watch some television. I think it's very important for patients to be selfish and prioritize their own health during their treatment, and surround themselves with positive people. Anybody who talks like this, just remove them from your circle.
Now we are talking about people who have cancer. How can you prevent cancer? Is there any ways? Is there any lifestyle that we can follow to prevent cancer?
About, I would say 60%, 50 to 60% of cancers in India are preventable. And, so I always talk about it, the ABCs of cancer prevention. It actually makes me remember, that's how. So A is, avoid alcohol, avoid tobacco, any form of tobacco, whether it's smokeless or smoking. Avoid oral contraceptive pill and hormone replacement therapy for a long time. Avoid processed foods as well, because they have a lot of preservatives in them. Avoid the sun for a long time. And skin cancer is not a major issue in India, but but we do see patients with skin cancer. If you're going in the sun, use a sun protective factor. B is for be vaccinated. We have 2 vaccines which prevent cancer. We have hepatitis B, which is part of the national immunization schedule, and the human papilloma virus, which prevents 80% of cervical cancer. I mean, if you are in a Western country like UK or any of the European countries, all girls and boys are vaccinated against cervical cancer. Australia is the first country to get rid of cervical cancer as a problem because of vaccination and screening. So be vaccinated, be breast aware, and breastfeed. That's for B. C is for calm and meditation. Very important, for a stress-free life, and there is some linkage to cancer as well. D is for diet. Have a diet which is rich in fresh fruits, vegetables, fiber. So prebiotic and probiotic. So prebiotics are things which have high fiber in them, and probiotics, which have the good bacteria in them, like yogurt, curd, and other things. So D is diet. E is exercise. I've talked about that, very important. F is know your family history. If you have a close relative who had breast cancer at a younger age, then you must actually speak to someone about it and see what your risk is. We are able to calculate that nowadays. And then S is for sleep and screening. Very important that you look after your sleep. So breast cancer and prostate cancer used to be called as night shift diseases, because it was felt that it mainly happens in more so in people who do night shifts, but that is not the case. There is a bit of controversy. But there was a study in Spain which was done, which showed that if you sleep before 9 p.m. and if you have 2 hours between your last meal and the time you go to sleep, the risk reduction in breast and prostate cancer was almost 20 to 25%. And S is for screening. Start screening for cancer, cervical cancer, 3 years after sexual exposure or at the age of 23 years, every 3 years. If you have HPV DNA, every 5 years. For breast cancer, start mammograms from the age of digital mammograms from the age of 45. For colon cancer, have a stool occult blood test from the age of 45. And I would suggest have a fecal immunochemical blood test, fecal immunochemical test in the stool, not the GAIAC method, for which you have to give 6 stool samples in 3 separate bowel movements. And colonoscopy is ideal, but I mean, given our, I think none of my patients would ever want to have it. So at least stool test is fine. For head and neck cancer, if you're a tobacco chewer, get your mouth examined at least once a year. I think, and for cervical cancer, like I said, you do HPV DNA testing. So these are the A, B, C, D, E, F, and S's for cancer prevention screening.
And you just mentioned stress has a link with cancer. So can you elaborate on that? Stress.
So, stress is linked to all non-communicable diseases, I would say. For hypertension, diabetes, a lot of time patients would say, I'm going through a divorce, having a lot of stress in my life. Do you think this is why I've developed breast cancer? There was a big study which was done, which showed that, there is not a close linkage of stress to breast cancer. But this is something, again, which is an area of research. So my perception is, a lot of patients come to the clinic The other thing is, all of us have some kind of stresses in our life. So it's not possible to have anybody who has no stress in life. So it's very difficult to implicate stress and cancer. But I feel yoga, meditation, all of these are strategies which would help us look after our mental health. And we should try and incorporate them in our lifestyle.
So you'd say the positive lifestyle will help?
Yes, definitely. Positive attitude will make you exercise, have a good diet. And, it's, to give you the motivation to exercise, yeah.
And what about follow-up care for cancer patients?
I think follow-up care is very important. Listen to your oncologist. What general follow-up for most patients is, for the first 2 years, the risk in early cancers, the risk of recurrence is high. So we would suggest that you come to the clinic every 3 to 4 months. In the 4th to 5th year, we say come every 6 months. And after 5 years, we say, we'll see you annually. And in breast cancer, usually, we don't recommend any tests except an annual mammogram. Some of our patients are on the 6 monthly injections for 3 years for bone health. So then we would recommend a blood test that has to be done. And if you're on one of the hormone tablets, letrozole, we do a fasting lipid profile once a year because that can make the cholesterol go up as well. So these are the main follow-up tests that we recommend. No PET scans. PET scans are not recommended as part of follow-up for early breast cancer.
Okay. And what about, you just talked about hormone therapy. So what are the side effects of that?
So,
anything long-term?
Most of our patients are on it for 10 years nowadays. Main side effects are relating to hot flushes, night sweats. One of the drugs can affect the bone health. So to counteract that, nowadays we give this injection, which is usually used for osteoporosis. But we've learned again from our patients that if you give it for 3 years at 6 monthly intervals, it's called zoledronic acid. It helps with bone health, but it also adds 2% to increasing breast cancer survival as well. And I give it to most of my patients who are what we call intermediate or high risk of recurrence. So this is a recommendation in the last 2 years, which has changed our practice.
Okay. Now let's talk something about clinical trial work. So how does it work? Would you recommend someone for it?
So I think that's a very, very important question, very close to my heart. And I think everything we do today is a result of clinical trials. So every drug, every modality that we are using in our clinic today is possible because thousands and thousands of ladies have kindly participated in clinical trials and made it possible for us to say this is standard of care. So clinical trials are various phases of clinical trials. Phase 1 is, when you're trying the drug for the first time in humans and you're trying to find out if it is safe for us. And here you're trying to find the right dose of the drug. What is the maximum tolerated dose? Phase 2 trial is, once the drug has gone through phase 1, we know it is safe in humans. First of all, we start with animal studies, then phase 1. Phase 2 is we want to see if it works in a certain type of cancer. Let us say breast cancer, whether the drug works in breast cancer. We know that the drug works, then it moves on to phase 3, where we then compare it to the standard of care. So when we had these bisphosphonates, we compared it to nothing because nothing was the standard of care. We did not give breast cancer patients bisphosphonates. So then we did the trial and then we looked at 5-year survival, 6-year survival, and we realized that giving this drug actually improves survival for breast cancer patients, not only improves bone health. We actually gave it for improving bone health. So I think phase 3, phase 4 is when the drug has been licensed and we are trying to learn more about it. So I would encourage patients to find a clinical trial if it is available for their type of cancer and participate in it, because a lot of new drugs that are coming up, you can have access to them if there is a clinical trial available.
So any of your patients opted for any case study?
So again, we've had amazing, so when the trastuzumab, this targeted drug we are using was being used, and so we had a patient who was on treatment for she had advanced cancer, and we gave her trastuzumab as part of the trial. This was in early 90s, I'm talking about, no, mid 90s, late. So she'd been in remission for 6 years. So, you know, the cancer had completely disappeared. So again, one of my mentors and I would, every clinic, you know, talk to her whether we should stop the drug. And she was like, no, I don't want to stop the drug. I want to continue. So I think, I don't know whether she's still on it. She may be the longest one on trastuzumab.
So we have almost come to the end of the session. So
yeah,
anything
so one more thing I want to say is, you know, one of my other mentors I worked with, 85% of our patients would be in a clinical trial. And one of our amazing nurses present this study at a European meeting. And I think so it's very important. The problem we have in India is we do not have as many clinical trials as we should have for our patients. And I think we are changing that. A lot of academic centers, including us at Apollo, we are trying to start a lot of clinical trials from phase 2 to 3, so that, you know, our patients can also have access to that.
Okay. So before you before we ask audiences for questions, would you like to add anything else?
No, I think my key thing is, you know, be aware about your own body and take help. Don't be scared of COVID. COVID is here to stay. I mean, vaccine we keep talking about. So don't let COVID stop you from taking medical care for you or your loved ones.
Okay. So now let's go to questions from the audience. There's this question: from what age do we have to start screening for breast cancer? Or is it a must after a certain age?
So again, it is a choice. And like when I was in UK, I remember my GP would hound me for, not hound me literally, you know, make so many calls because I hadn't come for screening, even it was offered free. In India, I think we have to take this in our own hands, especially for mammography for breast cancer. I would suggest after the age of 45, you should have a digital mammogram every year. And if you are between 40 to 45, you can have a digital mammogram with digital breast tomosynthesis. And I think most of these are available at most major centers. We have this available here at the Proton. But, you know, just Google it, question where you're going, question the center where you're going, whether the facility they have is the right one. If they don't have it, just find another one.
Okay, and what about other forms of cancer?
So for screening, again, for colon cancer, it's a stool occult blood test that you would have from the age of 45. Again, you know, have a fecal immunochemical test, which you give one stool sample. If it's the old method, the GAIC method, then you have to give a stool sample from 3 separate bowel movements. And cervical cancer, I recommend HPV DNA because you need to do it every 5 years. So, you know, we are developing a card called a screen card. So, you know, if you have it today, you know that you're due your next mammogram next year. You have the date, set a timer on your phone that, you know, 5 years later, you are due an HPV DNA test, or 3 years later, you're due a pap smear. So a stool occult blood, have it once a year annually. And if the occult blood is positive, you have to then undergo a colonoscopy. And it's such a simple test to do. You know, you just need to drop a stool sample at a center that is closest to you and get it done. And if you have any mouth ulcers or redness in your mouth, you have it checked out by an ENT surgeon.
Okay. So there's another question: is chemo unavoidable in cancer treatment? Is chemo treatment unavoidable in cancer treatment?
No, not everybody needs chemotherapy. Like I said, we have to individualize. In fact, in patients with advanced breast cancer, we are able to avoid chemotherapy for about 3 years in some of our patients, or even longer in some patients. So no, chemo is not unavoidable. We individualize it, and after a lot of thinking and deliberation and shared decision making, take a decision to offer chemotherapy.
Has chemo become customized, if I can use the word?
Yes, we do. I mean, it's like, let us say, a small tumor, which is, and the lymph nodes are clear, it's hormone ER positive, but HER2 positive. Then I would give, weekly chemotherapy for just 3 months. In the olden days, we used to give 6 months of chemotherapy with anthracycline and taxane. Here, you're only giving a weekly taxane. So yes, I mean, we customize it for every patient, and also we customize it based on patient's own, what I can say is, other issues that they may have, whether they have diabetes, whether their organ function is affected because of diabetes, if they have neuropathy, whether they have heart. So what we do before we start chemotherapy is, the most important thing is whether the end organ function is normal. So I normally would do a kidney function, liver function, and I would also do a baseline echo and ECG. And if all of these are normal, then then we proceed with the discussion for chemotherapy.
There's this question. Doctors are, when they're exposed to patients, they see symptoms all the time. So do you feel apprehensive about getting it yourself? Because a small lump can make you scared. That's the next question.
So I think so it's a very, very good. Let me think about it. So I haven't thought about it yet. So no, but the thing is, if your close loved one or anybody complains of something, the first thing you think about is cancer. So I used to be I wanted to be a cancer specialist since I was in my early teens, actually. So then I realized I have to become a doctor and then a cancer specialist. So when I was in medical school, my differential always used to be top was cancer for everything. So I think the teachers stopped looking at me because they thought she's going to say cancer. That is the only thing I can think of.
So why this fascination with cancer from such an early age?
I know. So, I was very lucky that I was focused at that time, and lucky. And so I feel like I'm living my dream. So work is not work. It's a pleasure. So I think I read a book, Fever, by Robin Cook, and the way he looked after his daughter and fought everything to make sure that she gets the right treatment, the research. If you haven't read Fever, read it.
I read that too.
So the way he fights for his daughter Michelle, I think her name was Michelle. So I thought, I also want to do that. I want to fight for my patients. I want to do what is best, and I found the whole thing so exciting and so I was quite focused that I wanted to become a cancer specialist. And then the whole thing is you have to be a doctor first. I had no clue I had to become a doctor first. So it's a big journey to end up in Tata Hospital. In fact, I met Dr. Advani in my teens, who's one of my mentors in India. And I said, sir, I want to become a cancer specialist. He said, do your post-graduation and then come. I don't think he thought he'll see me. But I ended up there in '94. And I joined the same day. The day I met him, he sent me to see Dr. Desai, and he sent me to the HR. And I thought, I'll be asked to give tests, exams, or whatever. I joined the same day. I went and saw him. I reminded him that I met you as, I think I met you after 12th or in my first year. Yeah.
This is another question. Does having comorbidities like high BP, diabetes affect cancer treatment and cause more side effects to
No, I
make
think
life?
as long as it is well controlled, it does not cause more side effects. So what I do proactively is some of the medicines that we give you can make the diabetes worse. So like we give steroids as part of anti-nausea medication during chemotherapy, which can make the blood sugar go up. So what we do is we proactively make a plan for those 3 days that the patient is taking anti-nausea drugs, so that that side of things is handled well. So, I mean, I would say 70% of my patients have either blood pressure or diabetes or previous history of heart disease or bronchitis or COPD. So, so I think we have learned to work with that and chemotherapy very well.
Okay, okay. Someone is asking, given the fact that cancer care is still at a primitive stage in India, as long as it is affordable, is it advisable for someone to go abroad for treatment?
So again, I can't stress it enough that you do not need to go abroad for treatment at all for anything. In fact, I would say some of the treatment is better in India. I have spent 20 years in London. So, and it's not because I'm from India. I'm not saying it because of that, because I'm very black and white, and I would say it the way it is. And I do not think there is anything that is available abroad that is not available here, including the new technologies. And I think in India, we've been quite good at adopting new technologies. The key thing is to optimize it and use it in the right patient at the right time. So, so I think there's no reason for patient to go abroad.
Okay. So
the only reason I would say is to go abroad is if there is a clinical trial. I recently sent a patient abroad actually because we found this rare marker in their cancer for which we found a clinical trial available in US. So the patient went for that. So I think if it is that, that's the only time I would recommend it.
So there's another question. Can chemotherapy and radiation result in relapse of cancer?
So I think the treatment will not result in relapse of the cancer. The treatments will decrease the chances of relapse. And so when we talk to patients about treatments, we always talk about, what is the risk of recurrence? If the risk of recurrence is very low, we don't give actually, sometimes we don't even recommend chemotherapy. So, but if the risk of recurrence is intermediate or high, we would have a discussion about chemotherapy. And the recurrence risk is dependent upon the size of the cancer, the grade of the cancer, whether the lymph nodes were involved, and what their genomic signature was of the cancer. So I think all of these, what the receptor status was, all of these drive the risk of recurrence for each patient. So the biology of the cancer is different in everyone. All of us look different. So our DNA is different. Similarly, the DNA of the cancer in everyone is different.
Okay. So we have come to the end of this session. So would you like to give the concluding comments?
No, I must thank you, Nilakshi, and thank Times of India for hosting this webinar. I think it's talking about cancer and increasing public awareness is very, very important in moving forward. And I would just have one thing to say is don't ignore any symptoms or anything that is bothering you, worrying you. Come to the hospital and see a specialist, because despite COVID, the hospitals are safe.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bhavna. It was a very informative session. And now I'd like to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you once again. Stay safe.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.